Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, Alexandra. Great to see you, hon. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Sabbath Collective, a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of the Bible. Hey, Neets, good to see you. Hey, Evelyn, great to see you. Diana and Aaron, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So tonight we're going to get into a topic that you don't necessarily hear a lot of talking about. It's depression. The title to tonight is Depression Happens. We know this. We know it because we've seen it in ourselves. We've seen it in our loved ones. We see it in our world. And whether it's a situational depression or a kind of chronic cyclical pattern of depression, because of our culture's woefully inadequate system of mental health support and a lack of basic understanding of depression, depression also carries with it an awful lot of anxiety. And there are common things people say to those in depression. So I want to ask you, what has someone said to you that is possibly the last thing that you ever wanted to hear when you were really struggling with depression? Hey, Barika, great to see you, hon. Like, for instance, one of the classic, what do you have to be sad about? So what has been some phrases or some things that well-meaning friends have said to you when you were really finding yourself in depression? Let me see what you have heard. And I'm resistant to define depression, but rather here is a great description of what it feels like to one person. And a lot of the quotes I have tonight is from a website called Healthy Place. And this really describes it well. They say having anxiety and depression, because we oftentimes do have anxiety with depression. We're really fearful about the depression. We're thinking, when is it going to happen? Or if we feel little feelings, we're like, oh no, is it going to happen? So this is really a great way of kind of summarizing what this feels like. Having anxiety and depression is like being scared and tired at the same time. It's the fear of failure, but no urge to be productive. It's wanting friends, but hating socializing. It's wanting to be alone, but not wanting to be lonely. It's feeling everything at once and then feeling paralyzingly numb. That's really just an awesome description of it. So let's see. Hey, Will, did Will join us too? I see Anita said, Will. So Barika says, just pray about it, which a lot of people tell you that, right? Just pray about it. Where's your faith? Look at the good things. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps. A lot of these kind of phrases people say. Think about other people that have it worse. That's a good one, Barika, right? Really unhelpful things to hear when you're in depression. There is depression seen, by the way, in people all throughout Scripture. So a lot of times people try to project this thing of like, well, if you have a relationship with God or you're in faith, you shouldn't be depressed. I see tons of people in depression in scriptures. Now we're going to look at one of them, one of their stories tonight with some common elements in depression, along with how God actually came in to support this person with it. And by the way, let me just clarify this. This is not 10 easy steps to overcoming depression. Tonight we'll instead sort of thin slice a part of Elijah's story. Evelyn says, honestly, I don't share with anyone. I know most people don't understand, especially those who haven't been through it. And that's exactly true, Evelyn. Most people don't understand, and so they say the exact opposite thing. So tonight I'm hoping that not only will you get courage when you see Elijah and how God kind of stepped in with him, But also, if you've been so fortunate to never really struggle with depression, that you would get more of an insight into people that do. So again, we're going to look at the life of Elijah and a bit of backstory with this. When Adonai delivered the people from slavery in Egypt, God set up these parameters, these laws, these boundaries in which his people would live as a nation and worship him as the one true God. 1 Kings 16 tells us King Ahab of Israel marries the Phoenician princess Jezebel of Sidon. So Jezebel here comes in and she introduces Baal worship into the royal court. So Ahab builds a temple to Baal at Samaria and erects an Asherah pole, which is to worship the fertility goddess. And I don't have time to get in all the ins and outs of this particular kind of worship, but there's a lot of shenanigans that goes on around this worship. Jezebel is characterized as evil, even referenced in the book of Revelation as a type. She was most likely very educated, very strong, very smart, and she co-ruled internal parts of the government with her husband, the king. So Jezebel sets about killing all of the prophets of the Lord. So the first thing she does is bring this other religion with her. And again, this nation is supposed to be a nation that is under the Lord, that only serves him, and that stays together as a community, as a nation, and even in their own practices of worshiping the Lord. She comes in and she brings these other practices and they follow. And so then she begins killing all the prophets of the Lord because she doesn't want anyone speaking truth or giving a different perspective. And that's how you always know that you have a tyrannical leader, is when there's no other opinions that are allowed to be heard. So Elijah, who is a prophet, escapes. And so do 100 other prophets who were hidden by a guy named Obadiah, who was kind of like the chief of staff kind of person, who's a follower of God. So again, there's a lot of interesting information about this contrast between Baal and Yahweh. And if you have time on your own, definitely get into that and study it, because you really see the difference. Hola, Melissa, great to see you. Hey, Aaron, shenanigans, that's exactly right. Hey, Maureen. But basically, the Israelites were a people who, like all of us today, seemed to be very influenced by who they were hanging out with. Instead of being the influence, they are being influenced away from biblical laws and codes and morals. So they were also a people, and we've talked about this several times, that were very dependent on rain. Rain to them was life. It's not like they could just walk into their kitchen and turn on the faucet or turn on a sprinkler on their farm. If it did not rain, they did not eat. And Baal promised rain. So they chose Baal over Adonai. And again, Judaism is a monotheistic religion. In other words, pick one. You don't have a list of gods when you're in Judaism. There's only one. And so, therefore, you can't say, yeah, I'll continue to serve the Lord, but I'm going to add this one because I want fertility. I'm going to add this one because I want rain. God says, no, it's only me and me alone, and you trust me for everything. So Elijah, who is a prophet, tells Ahab that there will be a serious drought because of this. And then in 1 Kings, if you're following along with me in your Bibles, I use the complete Jewish version. 1 Kings 18, 1 and 2 says, a long time passed. Then, in the 3rd year, the word of Adonai came to Eliyahu. Now, you're going to hear me say Hebrew names, because I'm reading out of the complete Jewish version. And keep in mind, this is Elijah, as we say it. So, the word of God comes to Eliyahu. Go, present yourself to Achab, which is Ahab, as we say it, and I will send rain down on the land. So this is God saying this to Elijah to go and tell the king, Ahab. So when Eliyahu went to present himself to Achab, the text says, the famine in Shomron had become severe. So 3 years without rain. This is no good. Elijah and Ahab meet, And Elijah said if the king wanted any rain to fall, he was to gather all of the people on Mount Carmel. Joining them were to be 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah. So imagine this. One dude, Elijah, he's a prophet. He hears from God. He's obedient. He goes to the king, Ahab. Ahab, who's married to Jezebel, not a good woman, and all of her prophets of Baal and Asherah and all of the people, they're called to this kind of showdown. Ahab is desperate, so he concedes. He needs rain for his people. And so all the people then kind of gather together in anticipation. Now, a couple of years ago, almost 10 years actually, I went to Israel. Ryan and I, my son, went. And one of the things that we saw that was really incredible was Mount Carmel. Now, this would have been this place where this fire display, we're later going to read about this, would be seen. But here's the thing where this happened. It wasn't remote. As you can see, hopefully you can, this was on top and overlooking the plain of Zebulun, the lower Galilee, the mountains of upper Galilee, and the Kishon River. So when they stood on top of this mountain, it wasn't just in front of the people that had gathered there. It was in front of everyone who could look up to the mountain and see the fire. So as for the group of prophets that Elijah spoke of, only the 450 prophets of Baal made it to the gathering. Remember, there were supposed to be 850 prophets of Baal and prophets of Asherah. The 400 prophets of Asherah were actually supported by Jezebel, and she most likely made sure they would not be in attendance to keep them safe. So at this gathering, they weren't there. So here's what happens. Elijah steps forward, and he begins to speak to these people and the prophets. And here's what he says. The text says, "How long will you be dancing between two ideologies? If the Lord is God, go after him. And if the Baal, go after him." This was a challenge that Elijah threw out to the people. Pick one, he's saying. In 1 Kings 18:22, it says, "Then Elihu said to the people," this is Elijah, I alone am the only prophet of Adonai who is left." Now, we're going to get into this in a little bit, but this isn't actually a truthful perspective, although he's not lying. We're going to get into this in a little bit. "While Baal's prophets number 450. Let them give us 2 young bulls, and they can choose the bull they want for themselves. Then let them cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. I will prepare the other bull, lay it on the wood, and put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of Adonai, and the God who answers with fire, let him be God." The text goes on and says, all the people answered, "Good idea, agreed." So Elijah tells the prophets of Baal, you go first. So they took the bull, 450 prophets, they take a bull that was given to them, they prepare it, they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon, the text says. "Baal, answer us." But no voice was heard, and no one answered. As they jumped around on the altar they had made, around noon, Elihu began to ridicule them. "Shout louder," he said. "After all, he's a god, isn't he? Maybe he's daydreaming, or he's on the potty." This is a literal Hebrew translation. Maybe he's on the toilet, or he's away on a trip. Maybe he's asleep, and you have to wake him up. So they shouted and slashed themselves with swords and knives, as their custom was, until blood gushed all over them. Now, here's the thing. For those of you who kind of just brush over texts that are familiar really quickly, part of this Baal worship was that people would slash themselves with knives, okay? So I know you just think, well, yeah, that's what they do as a pagan idolatry. But imagine you're Elijah in this highly charged emotional situation with a bloody frenzy going on. People are screaming and dancing and yelling and cutting themselves with knives. And if you've ever seen anyone cut themselves, it's awful. And Elijah is standing in the middle of that, and also he can't help but to assimilate that energy. So even though he's standing in the place that God has them, he's still a human being. And there is energy around this. And Elijah has absolutely got to be in the flight or fight mode. He has to be. He's a human being. He can't be unmoved by what he's standing in the middle of. And that enters into everything. So let's continue with the text. By now, it was afternoon, and they went on ranting and raving until it was time for the evening sacrifice. But no voice came. No one answered. No one paid any attention. Then Eliyahu said to all the people, "Come here to me." So Elijah says, "Come here. This is enough. Come here." All the people came up to him as he set about repairing the altar of Adonai that had been broken down. So again, they stopped worshiping the Lord. So the altar had been broken down. And so he repairs it. Eliyahu, the text says, took 12 stones, in keeping with the number of tribes of the son of Jacob, to whom the word of Adonai came, saying, "Your son is to be Israel." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of Adonai. Then the text goes on to say he digs a trench around it, he arranges the wood, he cuts up the bull, and he fills 4 pots with water and pours it off all over the offering and all over the wood until it goes into this trench. And then he tells the people to do the same thing 3 times. So it is completely soaking wet. Then the text goes on and says, Eliyahu the prophet approached and said, "Adonai, God of Avram, Yitzhak, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, Adonai, hear me, so that this people may know that you, Adonai, are God, and that you are turning back their hearts to you." Then the fire of Adonai fell. It consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "Adonai is God, Adonai is God." So again, these are people that want signs. God gave them a sign. Then Eliyahu tells them to seize the prophets of Baal, and he kills them. Now, let's just park again here. This trauma is all really piling up. Now, we all understand why these false prophets need to be killed, because they are enemies of Israel. And I get that. And when I say I get that, I don't really get that. I just know that that's how God dealt with Israel to keep them isolated and safe. We don't have that same way today. So obviously we're not going to relate to that in the same way. However, even if killing these people because they were a threat was the correct thing to do, it still was not easy and should not be easy. And the Bible talks about that you shouldn't take this in an easy way. So the miracles here are going to continue, but now Elijah has 2 things. First of all, he stands in this tremendous chaos with all this going on. He sees this miracle of the water and the fire. Now he has to be involved with killing 450 people. That's not nothing, okay? Say it with me, post-traumatic stress. That's not nothing. Even if you're doing what God wants you to do, that's still not nothing. So the text goes on. Then Eliyahu said to Ahab, "Get up and eat and drink, because I hear the sound of heavy rain." And he tells his servants to go up and look out toward the sea for the rain. The servant said, "There's nothing there." 7 times Elijah says, "Go again. Go look again. Go look again." Talk about, what did Skyla say? Donna is going in with the grown-up talk. Yes, Skyla, I am. So there's nothing there. So the messenger keeps coming back to Elijah and saying, "There's nothing there. There's no rain." 7 times Elijah says, "There's going to be rain. Go again." Again, this is pressure. The 7th time, the servant said, "Now there's a cloud coming up out of the sea. no bigger than a man's hand. And Eliyahu said, "Go up and say to Achav, prepare your chariot and get down the mountain before the rain stops you." A little while later, the sky grew black with clouds and wind, and heavy rains began to fall. And of course, this is what the country needed, right? Rain. So this was a great miracle. This is an incredibly tense, high-stakes faith and action drama played out here. And Elijah was defending Yahweh's name for the sake of his people. And let me tell you something. That kind of victory is exhausting. And people don't often think about that. They just think, oh yeah, victory. Everybody should be happy. I remember one time when we were all working on a project with the church that we were involved in for several years. And we thought it was going to happen, and then it would fall apart. And we thought it was going to happen again, and then it would fall apart. And time after time after time, up and down for years and years and years. And finally, this project came together, and we were able to see happen what we were praying would happen. And I was so exhausted when it happened that I went home and disconnected completely from the next phases of the vision of this ministry. Only had a very small, narrow focus. Big victories take their tolls. And that was probably one of the bigger mistakes I've ever made, to disconnect. But because I didn't fully understand how much of victory took its toll, and I didn't know how to walk through that, I crashed, and I crashed big. Flight or fight is exhausting. And we have to create space for our bodies to recuperate and readjust, sometimes to a new normal, even when it's a good normal. So here comes the tipping point with Elijah. 1 Kings 19, verse 1 through 5. It says, Achav told Izabel, which is Jezebel, everything Eliyahu had done and how he put all the prophets to the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to say to Elijah, "May the gods do terrible things to me and worse ones. Besides, if by this time tomorrow I haven't taken your life, just as you took theirs." Now we get into the real core of this teaching. On seeing that, Elijah gets up and flees for his life. Now, you could say, why did he do that? And many people do. Many people sit in their Western couches, in their armchairs with their Bibles open and judge Elijah. Well, he didn't have faith. Well, he gave up. Well, why would he fear this person? He lost connection with God, blah, 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 blah. You can make all the judgments, spiritual judgments you want to. To me, it's kind of an obvious thing what happened with him because he's a human. He's mentally, physically, and spiritually exhausted. And now he's sensing a powerful evil that's coming after him. And let me tell you something. When you sense a powerful evil coming after you, it's a trauma. You don't just go, oh yeah, forget that. I just had this great victory. I'm going to be fine. You feel it literally breathing down your neck. And unless you felt that, you don't fully know the power of that thing. So here's the thing. It's not either or with Elijah. It's not either he keeps his faith or he loses his faith. It's not about even God versus evil and who you think will win. Here's the point of this. Bad things happen to good people all the time. All of the prophets that Jezebel just killed. What's going on in Elijah is what goes on in so many of us. It's both and. Yes, there's a powerful God who is working to restore his people through Elijah. And yes, there is a power in this evil of Jezebel. And when you know it's zeroed in on you, it's terrifying. He is living in this tension of both ends. And this is another trauma in a list of traumas he just went through. And let me tell you this, the body remembers trauma. It keeps count of them. You don't just whiz past it. Your body remembers it all. So the text goes on. When he arrived in Beersheba and Yehuda, he left his servant there, but he himself went a day farther into the desert until he came to a broom tree. A broom tree is a big shade bush. By the way, a broom tree is also where Hagar and Ishmael sat, waiting to die. So he sits under it and he prayed for his own death, the text says. Enough, he says. Now, Adonai, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the broom tree and went to sleep. So here we see Elijah does what we all do. He runs away from others. He isolates himself. Are you feeling this? And do you do it yourself? He goes to sleep. This was a dark time. And by the way, have you ever prayed to die? Because I have, and I meant it. It's not like he's afraid to die. He wants to. He just doesn't want to be at the hands of Jezebel. He doesn't want to live the life that he's living right now. And so he wants for God to just take him home. He's done. He's freaking tired. Do you understand? And have you ever felt that before? And now do you get a greater insight of why you respond the way you respond sometimes and why others do as well? Death is easier. You're exactly right, Rye. It is easier. It feels like an escape. So we don't need to know everything that he was thinking that brought him to this place. As many times as people try to dissect this in their Western way of reading the Bible, that's not even the point. His own thinking doesn't even matter. This is a human story. Depression can be psychological and physiological, and both. Now, I know I'm being a bit simplistic here, and I know this because my background is actually psychology. But sometimes simple is best. And one of the quotes I found that really explained this well is, I wanted to write down exactly what I felt, but somehow the paper stayed empty, and I could not have described it better. I'm going to post these quotes so you can take a look at them. But this sense of emptiness, right? Depression is empty. It can be triggered by events and thoughts, or it can come from a physiological shift based on nothing external at all. In this case, it seems to have obvious triggers, pretty much everything. There's both a physiological issue and a psychological issue with Elijah. And there's a literal weight that rolls over him. And have you ever felt depression comes over you like that? It's like this blanket, this heavy blanket just kind of comes over you. Yeah, that's really good, this quote. Just comes over you. And then when we say empty, we ask ourselves, how can emptiness feel so heavy? But it does. Sometimes we can guard against falling into depression, and we know ourselves and we listen to our bodies and we keep our minds and bodies healthy, but sometimes not. Depression happens. What we can do is accept the rhythms and try to navigate them as healthily as we can. So now let's look at how the Lord interacts with Elijah, who is in this dark place. In 1 Kings 19, 5b through 6, it says, "Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, 'Get up and eat.' He looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on the hot stones and a jug of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again." Now, how Adonai takes care of Elijah when he is in depression is not a template. Again, it's not 4 easy steps. It's more of a knowledge that the Lord sees and he cares. And he walks through this with us in a personal way. This is what he did for Elijah because this is what Elijah needed. And keep in mind, it also didn't fix Elijah's depression, but it keeps him moving towards shalom. So the very first thing that we see that God does and deals with is nourishment. 1 Kings 19:8 says, "He got up, ate and drank, and on the strength of that meal traveled 40 days and nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Now, for those of you who know me, you know this is my passion. Food, healthy food. Food as medicine. This is my passion. We must be intentional about that. Fish oil, water, coconut water, probiotics. Eat well when you're in depression. Support your brain and your gut. It matters. Now, here's what depression does. The depression craves sugar, carbs, and alcohol because that's what feeds it. Sugar, carbs, and alcohol keeps an unhealthy brain and gut. So, of course, depression wants more of it. But that's not what feeds your health. Depression, by the way, is a survivalist. And it'll tell you a story to get you to support it. Just so you know. But it's not that we look at depression like it's some sort of enemy that needs to be killed, because it's actually in some way part of us. It's more like we look at it like we talked about the Yatzer Hara and the Yatzer Tov, the good inclination and the bad inclination that we were born with. We master over the Yatzer Hara. We know it's there. We know it'll pop up from time to time, but we choose how we deal with it and how we live in it. It doesn't master over us. It's still there, though. Are you with me? So the text goes on. Then the word of Adonai came to him. He said to him, "What are you doing here, Eliyahu?" This is God who asked him this. Now, he's not asking in the literal way. It's more along the lines of him asking where Adam and Hava were, right? He's answering sort of, what's going on? He's asking. So he answered, "I have been very zealous for Adonai, the God of armies, because the people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, broken down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. Now I'm the only one left, and they're coming after me to kill me too." An important psychological and spiritual core issue comes out here. He feels like, hey, look, I did good for you, and you abandoned me. And literally, I'm all alone, and I'm the only one doing good. This all alone thought, as well as the abandonment thought, is sort of a theme with him. Elijah believed that he was the only one in Israel who was faithful and spiritual. Elijah was in touch with his feelings, but he wasn't in touch with reality. But listen, he is honestly not speaking the truth. See, he didn't think he was lying. He thought he was stating the truth, but his perspective was skewed. So he was honestly not speaking the truth. That's a little different than lying. He believed what he was saying, but it wasn't the truth. The things he said were not as he thought. The second is movement. It says, so God came to him. And by the way, as I'm saying these, if one of these really pops up to you and says, yes, this is really what seems to help me to get a little more perspective and balance, shoot me out a comment about it. So God came to give Elijah a new shift in reality. When you're in the throngs of depression, whatever it takes, allow yourself to move to a new place. Whether that's figuratively or physically, allow movement. 1 Kings 19:11, again, because depression wants you stuck. 1 Kings 19:11, he said, go outside and stand on the mountain before Adonai. Now, before I even say this, for those of you who have known me for a while, you know right where I'm going to go with this sentence. God tells Elijah, go outside. What's outside? The sun. Standing in the sun, looking 30 degrees below the sun, with your pupil that actually has a sun receptor in it for vitamin D, and the sun on your skin, and put your feet on the earth. And that is where health to the brain and the body comes from. It's important. Do some research on that if you don't believe me. It heals. Movement is what Elijah needed, preferably outside, just like us. So he feeds him, and now he gets him outside, and now number 3, the perspective. The text goes on and says, and right then and there, Adonai went past. So Elijah is outside. He's come out of his cave, standing in the sun, has his feet on the ground. By the way, they wore leather sandals, so they weren't blocking any of the earth's magnetic stuff going through there, like unlike our rubber soles, just an aside there. So he's standing outside, and the text says, Adonai went past. A mighty blast of wind tore the mountains apart, the text says, and broke the rocks in pieces before Adonai. But Adonai was not in the winds. The text goes on, after the wind came an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire broke out, but Adonai was not in the fire. And after the fire came a quiet, subdued voice. Elijah just came out of these grandiose signs, right? But look at this perspective. God is with you. He may not be where you want to see him or how you want to see him. All of this dramatic stuff goes on around you. It comes and goes. But he is with you, even in the subdued voice. It's all about perspective. Even when you don't feel him, when you can't know that he's with you, when you feel alone, moving is to sense where he is, which is why movement is so important. And again, depression wants to make you static and fixed. Depression is a Greek thinker. Movement allows you to hear the subdued voice where you don't expect it. And where is that? God is showing him it's everywhere. I'm everywhere. And the last one is purpose. Purpose is always other focused. The text goes on. Hey, Jean, by the way, nice to meet you. I know you're friends with Andre, and it's great to have you join us. And yes, the sun and breathing, very, very helpful. So the text goes on and says that Elijah is to anoint new leaders, find Elisha, and make him his protege, and that there are actually 7,000 other prophets of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in Israel. He is not alone. Philippians 2:4 says, look out for each other's interests and not just for your own. This is both a challenging and a healing thing we can do when we're in depression. Being around others in order to focus on them is helpful. Now, here's what this is not speaking about. It's not speaking about how people try to make you feel better. Hey, come out to the bar with us and have a drink and hang out with people because it's good to hang out with people. When you're depressed and you try to go into a situation where everyone's kind of partying and having fun, it only furthers this sense of separation, right? Don't you feel that? That's what it makes you feel. This is different. This is not trying to hang out with people to have fun. This is an outward focus of others. Elijah wasn't cured, but the Lord understood where he was at and gave him the things that he needed to walk. Nourishment, movement, perspective, and purpose. Those were his things. Now, maybe yours are similar. Maybe not. The point of this story is God understands. I am not looking for the right direction that is discovered, but rather that which is renewed and created as I am moving in the conscious obedience of God. In other words, no matter what the thoughts, the emotions, the physicality of depression, you don't deny those things, but you don't serve them either. Because depression serves itself, and it lies to you. You move in the conscious obedience of God as he leads you. You may not feel him, but if he wants to show you something, he can and he will. In this subdued voice that is all around you. I want to invite you to share your stories and things that have worked or things that have not worked on the page. And we're going to close this time with the lighting of the Shabbos candles. Now, traditionally, the mothers of the homes usually do this. And the Shabbos candles, And again, it's at sundown, a little before sundown, and the Shabbos candles connect us to the Sabbath light of peace, joy, and unity. And then the tradition is that she waves her hands in a gesture of welcome 3 times around the Sabbath, which is welcoming in the Sabbath. And then she prays as she covers her eyes from the flame, which is actually a symbol of ending all the work for the week. Blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart by his commandments, who has given us Yeshua the Messiah, and has sent us to be a light to the world. And then if you would say these words together, the Lord is our light and our salvation. May his light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth and the radiance of joy. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.